On our agenda, we have a hearing on House Bill 2561, authorizing domestic credit unions and modernizing their statutes. Eileen, can you give us an update or a bill brief, whichever you prefer?
It's an update because the brief is not brief, so here we go. House Bill 2561 authorizes domestic credit unions to operate outside of the state. It provides civil penalties for certain violations and allows the administrator to enter into informal agreements, removing requirements regarding duplicate filings, establishing appeals procedures for suspended credit and supervisory committee members, and requires the members of a merged credit union to approve such merger. It adds three new sections to the State Credit Union Code and amends other provisions of the State Credit Union Code. The bill passed the House Committee of the Whole on a vote of 114-3 on the 15th of February. New Section 1 allows a domestic credit union to do business out of state if permitted by the law of the other jurisdiction. New Section 2 allows the credit union administrator to assess and collect a civil money fee penalty against a credit union when a credit union engages in any unsafe or unsound practice or violates or knowingly permits any person to violate the State Credit Union Code or rules or regulations promulgated thereunder. The penalty shall not exceed $1,000 per day that such violation continues. And before the penalty can be imposed, the administrator must offer notice and an opportunity for a public hearing in accordance with the Kansas Administrative Procedure Act. And upon waiver by the respondent of the right to a public hearing, the hearing or portion thereof may be closed to the public when concerns arise about the prompt withdrawal of monies from or the safety and soundness of the credit union. New Section 3 allows the credit union administrator to enter into informal agreements with credit unions for a plan of action to address possible safety and soundness concerns. The adoption of an informal agreement shall not be subject to the provisions of the Kansas Administrative Procedure Act or the Kansas Judicial Review Act and shall be considered confidential examination material. Section 4 amends KSA 17-2201 to remove the requirement that duplicate certificates of organization be signed and duplicate bylaws be submitted by the organizers of a credit union. And this section also eliminates an obsolete reference to the charter board. Section 5 amends KSA 17-2208 to add language allowing a suspended credit or supervisory committee member to appeal such suspension. Such appeal shall be acted upon by the members of the credit union at a meeting held within 60 days after such suspension, and the suspended person shall have the right to appear and be heard at such meeting. Section 6 amends KSA 2228 to require approval by the members of the merging credit union for such merger to take effect. Current law currently requires approval by the members of each such credit union planning to merge. If enacted, this bill would go into effect on July 1st of 2024. And just one other aside, if new sections 2 and 3 look familiar to you as you've read through them, it's because they're virtually identical to the analogous banking code provisions as well. So they're virtually identical, except they apply to credit unions. And with that, Mr. Chair, I can stand for questions.
Thank you, Eileen. Committee, are there questions? I see none. Thank you. We will now turn our attention to the proponents. First up, we have Gail Bright with the Kansas Department of Credit Unions. Gail, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Gail Bright. I'm the Financial Examiner and Administrator for the Kansas Department of Credit Unions. My job duties include the oversight of the examination program. Unfortunately, Administrator Julie Murray could not be here this morning, so I will present the proponent testimony for House Bill 2561. You have her written testimony. You have Eileen's great update, so I think I will probably be very brief, but would be happy to stand for questions. House Bill 2561 was the result of a working group established by Administrator Murray with herself and management and staff of Kansas State Chartered Credit Unions, with the purpose in mind to have appropriate statutes for the current business environment, but also ensure guidance for safety and soundness of those credit unions. The first item in the bill, Section 1, would allow Kansas State chartered credit unions to cross state lines, which doesn't change the field of membership at all. It allows them to further serve their field of membership across state lines. But also, please remember that the credit union would have to get permission from the state they're going into and follow those state laws, but would remain under the supervision of the Kansas Department of Credit Unions. Sections 2 and 3, as Eileen mentioned, mirror the banking code. They would allow the imposition of civil penalties and also allow the department to enter into an informal agreement. And what this would give us going forward is more of a graduated enforcement authority. Because right now, under current law, we can issue what's called a document of resolution in an examination report. That's the most severe, if you will, of the findings. After that, we can issue a C&D and do a conservatorship and take the keys. There's nothing in between there. So with the civil penalties in the informal agreement, it allows us more of a graduated enforcement authority for the credit unions. Section 4 removes in duplicate. In today's world, in duplicate seems quaint and out of style with everything being done electronically. Section 5 gives the supervisory committee member the opportunity to appeal their removal. This ability already exists for a credit committee member, but it would add in the supervisory committee. Section 6 does change the merger statute. Currently, the memberships of both merging credit unions must vote on whether or not to merge. What this would do would allow the smaller credit union merging into the larger credit union in most cases to have their membership vote on whether or not they want to merge. Because a larger credit union, their members aren't going to see a change. There's not going to be a change for them. But for the smaller one coming in, there's going to be more products, more services, more of a change, and they deserve the opportunity to vote. And I believe Mr. Winkler will address that merger in more detail when he testifies. I told you I would be brief. That's my testimony. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Gil, thank you very much for being here and substituting for Julie. Committee, are there questions? Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Gail, for your presentation. When you was talking about the different levels, where does this fit into those levels, this new Section 2?
The civil penalties and the informal agreement. When we do an examination, the least severe we can issue is a supplementary fact, right, which is basically telling the credit union, we think this is a best practice and you should be doing it. Then there's an examiner's finding where we will have a violation of the regulation, but we'll give them probably up to a year to correct it. Then the document of resolution is something with a specific time frame. So then after that, that's where the civil penalties would come in. And the statute says up to 1,000. It could be, 100 or 200. It wouldn't have to be that full amount. And then after that would then be an informal agreement, which actually that authority already exists with the NCUA. So we would like to have that authority on our state side to be able to do that as well. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Senator Holscher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. With this bill, my understanding is that the domestic credit unions would be able to operate in other states if permitted. Do other states typically allow, us to come, those credit unions to come in, or do they have laws that prevent that, or how does that work?
Currently, there are 36 states which allow credit unions to build branches in different states. What I've kind of learned over my 5 years with the department is Kansas is not reciprocal.
I was just going to, that was my next thing.
So it's hard for somebody to come over, yes. So this would help expand those. Like I said, doesn't change our regulatory authority.
Okay, yeah, that was my next question then, if
Right.
and other credit unions from out of state would then be wanting to come here.
Right, and there, our umbrella organization, the National Association of State Credit Union Supervisors, has developed an agreement, and Kansas is one of about 20 states that have signed it to share regulatory information, and I know Missouri and Colorado have signed it, so that we can share with each other regulatory stuff.
Committee, additional questions? See none, thank you.
Thank you.
We will now turn our attention to Greg Winkler, who is the president and CEO of our credit union here in Topeka. Greg, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Gail set the bar pretty high there by keeping her comments brief, so I'll attempt to do the exact same thing and then stand for any questions that I can help with. So again, Mr. Chairman, thank you and committee members for the opportunity to provide written and verbal testimony today in support of House Bill 2561. I appear today representing Azura Credit Union, based just a few blocks away outside of one of these windows, right here in Topeka, and we represent and serve 62,500 members currently. We stand in support of these common sense updates to the Kansas credit union statutes and acknowledge that those are a result of a year-long working group between the Kansas Department of Credit Unions and industry leaders, including one of my coworkers who's here with me today. Three main ways in which this legislation would modernize the code on behalf of state-chartered Kansas credit unions are by simplifying our merger process, clarifying the enforcement authority of our state regulator, and removing the barriers of operating solely within state boundaries. And I'll speak to those 3 points as briefly as I can. First of all, Azura Credit Union is no stranger to mergers, as we are the product today of at least 6 prior mergers dating back to the early 1970s. Currently, Kansas statutes require the boards of directors and full memberships of both credit unions to vote to approve any merger, regardless of size differential. This proposal removes the requirement for the surviving or continuing credit union's membership to vote. It's important because the logistics of these votes can be time-consuming and costly for the surviving credit union, and could even limit the search for potential merger partners for a smaller one. For example, when Azura was asked to merge in a small credit union about 5 years ago, the total price tag of conducting a vote of our members would have been $100,000 just for that price tag and asking our members to cast a ballot. For material and mailing costs primarily. Confusion caused by the mailing to members of the larger continuing credit union is also a real concern because there's really no impact to the larger organization and the true impacts to the smaller one, to the merging credit union. Secondly, the language clarifying the authority for the Kansas Department of Credit Unions to use enforcement actions is not a concern to our credit union, nor does it seem controversial within our industry. If the change is adopted, it would seem exceedingly rare that an enforcement action escalates further than warnings, and truthfully, if it does, it's probably warranted to see some additional measures placed. So. And then lastly, the existing prohibition for state chartered credit unions from operating out of state is something unique to us that's not applied to federally chartered credit unions or other financial institutions. To be clear, this new language does not amend any credit union's field of membership requirements, but would only apply to serving consumers already fitting within a credit union's field of membership who happen to work or live in a neighboring state. The great example is right near here in the state line in Kansas City area. Our field of membership currently includes employees nationwide of the Procter & Gamble Company as a result of that small merger I referenced earlier for that plant in Kansas City. This language would allow us to establish a branch near a P&G plant on the Missouri side of the state, or any other state for that matter, with a Procter & Gamble plant or concentration of employees. But it would only occur and be approved if the business case existed for us to do so and the laws of that other state were approval and conducive to such a move. So thank you for your thoughtful consideration on House Bill 2561, and I would certainly stand for any questions that I can.
Greg, thank you very much for your testimony. Committee, are there questions? I see none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there any additional proponent testimony? Is there anyone wishing to testify as an opponent to the bill? Any neutral testimony? Okay, seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2561. Committee, with such a strong vote coming from the House, 114-3, I do intend to work this bill pretty quickly. So if you have additional concerns or questions, please let me know or get with representatives from either the supervisor's office or the Credit Union Association. That completes our work for today. Tomorrow we do have 3 House bills that we'll be hearing. They are all very familiar to you because we had Senate bills that were identical. So we'll get those off of our plate, and then we'll figure out next week sometime before noon today. With that, we are adjourned.